This is the Stacking Days Podcast, the podcast about the healing experience of recovery for people of color by people of color. This show is for the purpose of education and connection and is not a replacement for therapy or recovery care. We suggest you seek out the support of a trained professional for guidance with your specific circumstance. I'm your host, Ray Donovan, and I've been alcohol-free since September 2021. Welcome to the show. Hey y'all, what's going on? Welcome back to the Stacking Days podcast. Again, I say this every show, but I'm very excited to speak with the individual that we have today. Not only is she one who has her own story and journey to be able to share as far as the kind of centralized topic of the podcast, which is kind of dealing with the struggles of alcohol, but she's transitioned into a space where she's kind of reaching back and pulling others out. We talk a lot about, or we will be talking a lot about kind of trauma, both kind of individual traumas and generational traumas. And I think that the speaker that we have on today is perfect for that conversation. So I'm really excited to introduce Priscilla Maria to the show. I'm going to give her the mic so she can introduce herself and kind of give us, a recap on, her relationship with alcohol. Probably not more than 10 minutes, but and then we'll kind of get into the meat, so to speak. So Priscilla, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ray. I'm already trying to think 10 minutes, what can I put into that and what do I want to exclude? Because, that's way more comfortable to kind of let me give a vanilla version, nice little package.
Well, let's not do vanilla. So if you feel like you need to go over the 10, feel free. I'm not going to hold you back.
Okay. So I'm a certified trauma recovery coach. So that's a life coach with a trauma-informed lens. So what I do is I work with people and I help them reach whatever goals that they want to set and they want to reach. So for example, one of my clients, she's working more on using her voice and being more authentic on social media. So she might set some goals for the week and then we'll explore that and I'll help her stay accountable and find that motivation. Unlike with therapy, we treat our clients as whole. So in my mind and hopefully in hers, she sees that she already possesses the inner resources. She has enough knowledge, courage, creativity to make whatever she wants happen. But there's something keeping her from that, whether it's insecurity, whether it's tradition. A lot of my clients are from minority backgrounds, so culture plays a role in their limiting beliefs and things like that. But as far as me, so my relationship with alcohol was, I guess, 1/10 of yours, if I'm doing the math. To me, it lasted long, but I'll leave that to people. So between the ages of 17 and 20, I was binge drinking and I abruptly stopped. It's one night I just stopped. And my relationship with alcohol started really before I was born because it is a generational trauma that has been recycled on both sides of my family. So growing up, my parents and my uncles and my aunts, nobody was visibly consuming alcohol. Now, what they do in their private time, who knows? But at least at family parties and definitely in our household, nobody was getting drunk. Nobody was consuming liquor. And the reason that was the case was, if we look at my dad's side, his father was absent and his father was an alcoholic, and rest in peace. But yes, while he was on this earth, he was not a good example of a husband, of a man, of a father. And so that really turned off my uncle and my father, I don't know about the other ones, to drinking because they didn't want to replicate those behaviors. Because I won't put all his story out there, but yeah, he was engaged in very self-destructive behaviors. And then on my mom's side, similar story. Her father was an alcohol abuser and also, like my other grandfather, a wife abuser. And he had a lot of things going on. And on top of that, my mother, neither one of my parents grew up in this country. So my father's from Nicaragua, my mother's from Ecuador, and my mother in Ecuador, where she grew up, her house doubled as a bar, which looking back, I'm like, oh my gosh, like why would you allow a little girl and other girls to be in a bar, like in general, let alone their household? They can't escape that. And so my mother suffered a lot of trauma from men, and she also viewed and saw a lot of drunk men and how they would behave. And, vomiting, being rude, being, it really just turned her off to drinking. So that's why she didn't drink. Because it's like both of my parents had very negative examples of being drunk. So the question emerges, well, then why did myself and my brother develop these alcohol substance abuse issues? And so for me, I actually grew up thinking like, oh, I'm not going to drink. I'm not going to do any of that. Like very straight edge or whatever they call it. Even up to, I was going to say until college, but I did consume in high school. And I guess something that I've done over the years is I rationalized things. So, okay, I'm not drinking with my friends because, of course, high school, there's drugs everywhere and alcohol, but I wouldn't do that with my friends. However, if I do it with my family, then it's okay because it's my family. And if they're saying it's okay, then it's okay. And it's in a safe environment. But at the same time, a 17-year-old shouldn't be blacking out, shouldn't be binge drinking, shouldn't be doing any of those things. Because with me, out the jump, it was very indulgent. I don't understand how people can, have a little cocktail and be cute or like have their wine. That was never my narrative. It was always binge, even from 17. And so once I went to college, I was like, okay, I'm not going to drink because my family's not going to be around. And this is something I've worked for my whole life, is going to a college. And so on top of that, I actually went to a rehab, but it wasn't for me. It was my brother. So I went to one of those family sessions where they like explain, what alcoholism is and like the symptoms and the red flags. And I remember telling the woman there, because she knew, oh, you're going to college. And I was like, yeah. And she's like, oh, you're going to drink and stuff. And I remember saying like, I'm not going to drink. And I meant that. And so once I went to college, that lasted maybe like a month or less. And I pretty much was of the mentality of, I was just very angry. I had a lot of unresolved trauma from childhood and from adolescence. And I pretty much said, I'm over being this people pleaser, good girl. What's the point if, people haven't played by the rules towards me, towards my body, towards my feelings? So I was just very angry. And so once I made the decision to drink, I, again, like the same thing of just going, ham. Yeah. So, there's so many things I've never really discussed about my drinking, because they still bring me, I guess, embarrassment and shame. And I've already been judged so much, that it's like, I don't want to keep giving people fuel to use against me. But oh, well. So when I was 18, I'm in college. Drinking looked like definitely impaired judgment on multiple levels. I can't blame alcohol for my emotions because even when I was sober, I still acted the same. I actually would drink alcohol because and this is a poor joke, I would see it and call it like my anger management. Because I'm like, oh, I just want to laugh. Like, I just want to be happy. And so that was my motivation. And now I understand like that's self-medicating. You don't want to deal with the pain. You don't want to deal with the resentment. So I was just trying to be like laughing, but that doesn't really work. With alcohol, it's whatever you're feeling, it tends to like exasperate it and intensify it and like really exaggerate. So again, I can't blame it on alcohol because I would act the same. when I was sober under the, certain circumstances, but it definitely was like a lighter that would ignite. And looking back, I'm like, why was I so angry at this person? Like, why did I go from
Mm.
0 to 100? Why did I put myself in extremely dangerous situations that I can't explain? So I went to school in Baltimore, and here's the school, and then the campus. It's basically surrounded by, on some sides, certain areas that are very high crime and very straight up dangerous. Like people, even when I was a student there, like during the day, people have been killed, people get, just a lot of things go on. And there was I, just literally just running around, just looking for danger. And so now I've kind of understand more that that's trauma reenactment. And I
Mm.
was like, oh, that's what I was doing. Because I did experience a traumatic experience when I was 18 in college in one of these neighborhoods. And I automatically blame myself. That's been a very repetitive theme, is when something happens to me, I tend to take the blame. And so I didn't have that awareness that, wait, maybe there's more to the story. Maybe it's not all your fault. But because I lacked that awareness, I just kept subconsciously recreating it and putting myself in very similar situations. And I remember a therapist in college said that, yeah, you're basically recreating these situations so that you can win this time, or you can like
Mm.
fight back, or you can do what you didn't do initially and feel like there's some type of resolution. But that never worked. So I just kept like a hamster on a wheel, just doing the same things. And so, yeah, so that was like freshman year. And yeah, just a lot of going out. Studies were not my priority for like the first time in my life. And my brother, his addiction was spiraling worse and worse. And so he got kicked out of one of his rehabs, and they said, well, I don't know what else to recommend, so maybe you should try a wilderness program. So he went to a wilderness program. And then once my parents found out, they're like, oh, maybe Priscilla, you should go, because you're kind of like, something's wrong with you. They didn't know what was wrong with me, and I didn't even know what was wrong with me. And they didn't know my behaviors in
But they're,
college.
they're just
They
like,
just,
this might be good for you as well.
yeah, I was always the respectfully to my parents. They did the best they could, but my brother required more attention since he was a little kid. So I was kind of like in the background.
Were
And
you?
so
Is he or you you're older? Okay.
he's older.
Oh, he's older. Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, and that's where that culture component comes in, because he's the firstborn, he's a son. And so literally one of my family members told me, I can't treat you and your brother the same because they're different genders. I
Hmm.
can't do it. Like, he's always going to have more freedom. He's always going to have, like, it's just, in Latino families, the eldest boy is the heir of the family. So
I think it's that way in Caribbean families as well, because I'm the eldest of all of my siblings, and obviously, a boy. And even as I was getting older, I remember my father actually saying that to me. Like, when you're in a position to be able to raise your own children, you're going to recognize you got to raise your boys, differently than you raise your girls. So that's interesting,
yeah.
how that kind of commonality, just like regardless of what your language is, or your cuisine and what have you. I mean, there are definitely some cultural like ties there.
There are, yeah. And so they're like, okay, this is more of like a preventative, we already have one child who is clearly not doing well. Let's make sure we be proactive with this one. And so, of course, I wasn't, excited to go, and I did reject the idea, but eventually I went, and I did. I don't know if you're familiar, because you live in Colorado, you said?
I do now, yeah.
So this was in Utah, and Utah has like, a whole business of
Yeah.
wilderness programs. Yeah. So I went to one of those, and long story short, they make you tell your family, and I'm not a liar. I've never been a liar. So I've always been one to like, okay, this is what it is. And so I did literally like tell my more details about my partying, my drinking to my group. We have to, otherwise you're like shunned. In
Hmm.
order to enter the group, you have to literally give your life story. And then they made me send letters to my parents and my brother disclosing my sexual abuse from my grandfather. And I was like, all right, I guess I have no choice for that either. And so part of the program is also that the parents come and visit, if they can, to the desert. And so they came. And yeah, and I told them basically, more information. And basically, when I came back home, I quickly realized that nothing has changed. Ivan, my brother, is still very addicted. I mean, he left the program, literally left, and like it was a whole thing. And so I became very, I don't know what the word is, but hopeless maybe, in the sense that what was the point of this whole program for either of us? I also learned some family secrets that were very painful to learn about. And I also learned about one of my parents' traumas, which is also very painful. So I left knowing more secrets and traumas, and I left very angrier. And
I was
so
gonna say, it sounds like almost even like more traumatized, right?
I think so, because again, I mean, that's why I love platforms like the one that you've created, because you're curating this safe space with BIPOC people in mind. In this recovery space and every other recovery space I've been in, I've been the only Latina. And in this wilderness program, everyone was white. Everybody, the staff, the random people that brought us food and stuff, and the other cohort members, except one Black guy. And that was literally my best friend in the group. And it makes a difference. It makes a difference when you can't be yourself. And yeah, so yes, it was re-traumatizing in different ways, because I've had my own traumatic experiences with white people. So yes, that did not help. And then even when I would speak to the therapist, I mean, it's not like I could choose my therapist. It's just this, what was his name? Mayer, I mean, even when I would talk to him, I remember he'd be like sharpening like tool, because we're in the desert. So right. He was like making these tools. But the thing is, he wasn't even paying attention to me. Like when I'm like talking, he's just like, So things like that, I'm like, what's the point of this? And I know you guys are making a lot of money off of it. But
I was going to say also, I mean, there's some, I mean, we'll talk. I do want to talk about trauma and all, and the impact of all of that. But I would imagine that if I'm in your position, just knowing what I know now, sitting there being forced to do all of these things, as opposed to being able to come to it on your own with a degree of just like comfort to say, like, you know what, I'm ready to share this, as opposed to being forced into doing something. I'm sorry that was your experience. And I'm thinking about, like, is there a brown or Black girl sitting in somewhere in Utah right now, going through this exact same experience that ultimately is perhaps even counterproductive. But that's crazy. I'm sorry.
It's okay. Thank you for your compassion. These wilderness programs are controversial. And on one hand, it's like, what was that? Like, I would literally have nightmares, not because they abused me or anything, but because it was just this fear of, they don't tell you when you're leaving. They don't tell you when anyone's coming or leaving. People just leave, which for someone who has abandonment issues, that definitely triggered me. And they don't tell you the date. They don't tell you the time. They don't tell you what you're going to do. You have no control. You can't have conversations one-on-one. A staff member has to be in the middle, just things like that. I can go on about that. But on the other hand, it's like, how dare I complain? Because I had two parents that were able to finance this program that was not covered by insurance. And everybody there had money or some type of money. Nobody there was low income at all. And that's what happens when you are from low income. It seems like the most probable way that you can access mental health care is through the criminal system. And that's often the case. And because I wasn't impoverished, I had other options. And so, so it's always been a balance of, I have to be grateful, but I also, there was some issues with that program for sure. And so basically back to the drinking, they did recommend that I explore my relationship with alcohol, because when we're literally in the desert, so there is no liquor, there is no, you're completely secluded and everyone's wearing a uniform and things like that. And so I took their advice and I did go to an intensive outpatient program in Maryland once I went back. And I remember the guy did an intake and his conclusion was that I was an alcoholic. And I was like, I don't know, I was only 19 and a college student. And so for me, it's like, if I'm an alcoholic,
And everybody that I know is as well.
you need to round everybody up at Johns Hopkins and bring them with you, and you'll make a lot of money, because that seems pretty on brand for a lot of college students. But you can justify anything however you want to justify it. Because I thought of some people like, okay, but this guy goes to class drunk. This person, is always blacking out. Well, maybe they also have issues. Like, yeah. So because like you, for example, when you speak to someone who has a substance abuse history, it usually starts way, they've been at it for a while. And so maybe some of those people presently, if they haven't addressed it, are currently struggling with that. But I was like, all right, well,
I was just to interrupt really quickly. I recognize that there's something about that period of like college that really can lift the lid off for some folks, because they may have had some less than kind of healthy mechanisms even leading up to that space. But for me, even though and I had been drinking previous to college, I was drinking in high school, but when I got to college, I was unchecked. You know what I mean, for the most part. And again, I was around other folks that made it seem okay to also be doing what I was doing, even though I probably took it a lot further than they did. And ultimately, I don't know how it ultimately worked out for a lot of them. But there's something about that period of time that even when I was in college, nobody was talking about, from the standpoint of like faculty, administration, the institutions, how much of an issue it is for how much abuse takes place on these kind of campuses, like these like enclosed campuses where you're not in the middle of the city, but let alone like if you were in the middle of the city. Like I went to school in Washington, D.C. at Howard, which is similar, where you step off the campus, you're right in the hood. You know what I mean? So it's a different, a different beast. And I feel like I would have been more successful in that period of my life had I had a space that was a little bit more honest for me to address some of these things, or maybe even some others around me to say like, hey, look, you may think that this is normal, but it's not. And we've seen this before. It's not going to play out well for you. So I just wanted to throw that in there, where it's like, this person might have said that you were, through this this kind of intake, Priscilla's an alcoholic, but chances are, that could have been the case for many people that you were rolling with at the time, to your point.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. I've been to Howard. And so, yeah, it's just college it's a lot. I wasn't emotionally mature enough to live on my own or to go into that, but I did. And so that's like a whole thing. But yeah, so I actually did not complete this program. It's the only one of the 3 that I did not complete, because I wanted to go back to school. And I just came out of 6 weeks. Well, I was going to give a graphic example, but in the desert, there's no restrooms, there's no showers. Like, it was rough. So after 6 weeks of all of that, and then coming here to do, I think maybe I lasted 2 weeks, around there, I was like, I think I'm good. Like, I don't want to do this. If it was at the beginning of summer, sure. But I was like, I'm not going to not go to school and then graduate late or something. Mm-hmm. And so I did quit the program, and I know that they weren't happy about that. And so I remember going back to college still with Antabuse in my system. Mm. And Antabuse is for those who may not know, is a medication that they prescribe you so that if you do consume alcohol while you have it in your system, you become very ill. And so I remember going into my sophomore year, like, okay, let me calculate, how long it's been so I can start drinking again. And so, yeah, I just was not ready to stop drinking at that point. And I remember my mom asking me, she was like, can you say that you'll never drink again? I can say that. Can you say that? I'm like, no. Like, that gave me a lot of anxiety. Like, why would I never not drink again? Yeah. And that was kind of a red flag for me. But I get it. Yeah, looking back, because now I can say that for sure. But back then I was like, I couldn't imagine. And so once I went back to college. I mean, my parents had a whole contract that they wanted me to abide by. I was going to see a therapist. I was going to an on-campus, like it was basically AA and A together, but it was just students. And I remember one student, because I still wasn't abstinent, was like, I don't really feel comfortable that people are drinking in this group and aren't completely sober. And I was like, okay. But now that I look back, it's like I was in the wrong. Like, it's because I wasn't ready. It's not because he was doing too much. It's because I was doing. And so, yeah, I didn't stop drinking. If anything, it intensified. And that pretty much carried on until junior year. And then what led me to stop abruptly drinking was after a particular party where, again, I was binge drinking for no reason, like just binge drinking. And then it's like a whole thing. Like I'm laughing because I'm uncomfortable and I still struggle with guilt. But
basically, I mean, I can empathize with that for sure.
Yeah. And it's just, yeah. So very much doing the most, putting myself in very dangerous situations again. And then towards the end of the night, I put myself in a very precarious situation where I could have absolutely gotten raped. And it was just a very scary situation. And then I did black out that night. But thankfully, it was once I was away from this individual and I was back in my, I guess I completely blacked out on the way to our dorm. So thankfully, I guess for that. But after that occurred and I woke up the next morning and, kind of absorbed a little bit of some of the previous night's events, I was like, what the hell was that? And I was like, and that was not the first dangerous situation at all that I put myself in, but it was the last straw for me I was going to say for some reason, but I think it's pretty obvious. I did, because I've always had rape anxiety since I was a kid because of what happened to me. And so that was always like one of my biggest fears. And so because it became so almost real, I was like, ooh, God is telling me, you keep playing with fire and this is the last warning. It's not going to be there's no next warning, because at this point, I mean, I've
that's deep, though. But that's deep though. I mean, that's deep that you got to a place where you could hear that, right? And recognize that, you are potentially going to get burned if you keep playing with this fire here. And to, you say that you quit abruptly, but I mean, there was a whole series of years that led up to that event, right? It wasn't just that you partied too hard one night and you woke up, with a hangover the next day and was like, I'm going to stop this. It sounds like it was this is like from your childhood, led you to this moment where you're like, I have to do something different now. Otherwise, I see this not playing out very well for me. It could end up badly. And I'm just glad that you were in a place to be able to hear that voice. I am curious to understand, like, how did you actually stop abruptly? Sounds like it was very much a part of your swag at the time when So,
yes, yeah, and like I think you can relate as well. Like on college campuses, I kind of thought that everybody drinks, but actually they don't. It's because I was surrounding myself with people that were drinking, and partying was like constant, everything. So yeah, I had previous to this point experimented with abstinence. Probably maybe like 2 months was one stretch, and I was like, nah, and then I would go back. But what helped me was that I wanted it. Like literally that was the biggest difference, because, and for anyone listening who is considering recovery or maybe have had loved ones kind of really strongly suggested it, until you have your why and you're ready, you need that basically. And so once I had that fear in my body and I realized this isn't worth it, I was like, I need to take a break. So it wasn't a lifetime sobriety. It was just, I'm taking a break. And I was just like, I'm still taking a break. Like, I was just so turned off to drinking. But once that kind of, I was like, okay, time has passed since that situation. I was like, you know what? I like this. But let me see. That was November 2011. My brother fell into a coma January 14th. And so I'm so glad, because I believe in God's plan, and I'm so glad that I did stop randomly before my brother's brain injury and coma, because that was the most traumatic experience of my life, and it was something that lasted really for years. Like, it was the addiction before and everything that happened with that, the injury, the coma for 6 months, and then the very long road to recovery that he's still on. Yeah. So had I still been relying on alcohol, and at this point I was already blacking out, I was already less in control of my behaviors. And then if I would have continued with the alcohol plus this, that I can't even process what that would have looked like. So I had about maybe 1, 2, math is not my strong. Let's go with 3 months around there that I had stopped drinking when all of this happened. And so once that happened, I wasn't even worried about partying. I wasn't worried about anything but my brother not dying. Yeah. And so that definitely took a lot of my time, energy, and thoughts for a very long time. But even once I started, he's more stable. I guess at this point he had emerged from the coma. I started to go out again. And there was one time that I was like, I think I want to drink again. And it was like at the 7-month mark. And I'm so glad that I didn't. And I have to, shout out to the friend that I was with, because she was like kind of a little bit of voice of reason. But once I got over that craving, that hump, I was like, I can do this. Like, I have 7 months in, I can do this. And so, yeah, I stuck to it. It's been 11 years now. I'm 31 and I have not drank. I've not been drunk. And it's interesting because I never had a legal drink. I was always underage. I stopped at 20.
That is interesting.
Yeah. And and of course it was still accessible, but now it's like super accessible because I could literally just go to Trader Joe's and get wine, or I could just go wherever and legally purchase it. But I was done with that. And one thing that I realized was, although I was alcohol free, and also I personally didn't do other substances, that was my rationale as well, that, well, it's not really a drug because it's legal and because I've done it with family. But everything else is a drug. So I don't want to go there. And I also didn't want to follow certain people's like footsteps. Mm-hmm. So that was just it for me. It was liquor. And even though I became alcohol free, I wasn't in recovery because I developed an eating disorder. So it's like, I literally went from one thing to another, and it wasn't a conscious decision or a game plan. It wasn't anything that I was familiar with. By the time I realized that I had a problem, it was too late. I was already, very much into that. And that eating disorder, so it's like, okay, no alcohol, now it's the eating disorder. And unlike liquor, I have to deal with food on a daily basis. I can't go cold turkey as much as I would have liked to in that time period. So that was horrible. And honestly, that is something that I struggled with. I went to rehab for it. I did complete that one. And I didn't have my period for 16 months, which is not good for a young woman, but it's because I was so malnourished and working out way too much. And I developed osteopenia, which again, a young woman should not have a precursor to osteoporosis. But again, malnutrition, I had to do a heart monitor because they were concerned, I messed up my heart, which is common. Like, I didn't realize that you could die from eating disorders. You can get brain injuries. Like, it's really, really bad for you. And so I was like, wow, this is literally this is an addiction. Yeah. And they call it the good girl's addiction because same behaviors, just different symptoms. When you have unresolved trauma, and you don't address it, you're going to keep reaching out for some form of escape. And yeah, so I don't even know how to quantify my eating disorder because it lasted so long and it took various forms. But throughout law school, I was eating disorder. And that also brings me a lot of, I guess embarrassment, because I treated food and those symptoms, it was like an addiction. It was, secrecy, very compulsive, very weird, very shameful. And if you've noticed, I pretty much go from one thing to the next thing. So in high school, I already had trauma that I had not resolved. Okay, I'm going to go to a 4-year college that is a very challenging university. And now after that, okay, your brother almost died on you in front of you, but and then I don't know why I'm laughing, but after that, I went to rehab. And then after the rehab, about 6 months of me finishing the rehab, I was already in California, from Pennsylvania to California, in law school. And law school is notoriously very challenging, but I was there barely, still in my eating disorder and not less, 6 months out of an actual rehab. And there I am, just, all right, law school time. Now I'm 3 years in deep for that. And then once that kind of got better, I found myself in a very unhealthy relationship with someone. And so that did not help my mental health. So it's like one thing after the other. I didn't really have time to process my feelings, certain traumas that occurred even during that relationship. And so once I graduated law school and I decided I actually don't want to be an attorney. So I'm going to take this JD and I'm going to go on my merry way and figure out my own life, which was that was a big deal for me, because the reason that I was so, very intense about school, even when I was wilding and going in random neighborhoods, I was still getting good grades. I was still volunteering because it's that generational thing as well. And I know you say you're Caribbean, and the stereotype with Caribbean parents is that they're also tough.
That's the expectation, right? Like for a lot of folks of that, culture and generation, education is the only way out from, in a lot of ways from, excuse my language, the shit that they had to deal with,
Exactly. And so that was ingrained in my brother and I, because my father is a refugee. And so that was literally his ticket out of very bad circumstances. And so I always saw school as a job since I was a girl. And so once I finally completed my law degree, I was like, oh, I'm done now. I did it. Thank you. Thank you so much, because everything that I have, all the privilege I had growing up and now, is because of my parents. They did everything so that I didn't have to live in certain parts of LA like they did and things like that. And so I give all thanks to them and glory to God. But after that, I was like, okay, now what? I literally, what do I do now? And so that was a whole journey. But come the end of November of 2018, I found the courage again. It was kind of like with the drinking, where it just came out of nowhere. And I was like, I'm done with this relationship. I mean, he already asked my parents, basically I'm going to propose to your daughter and whatnot. So it was that serious. But a few days after that, I left him, and I left where we were living. I left the state that we were living in, and I moved to Michigan from California. And that was not abrupt at all. That was very, very long overdue. But the fact that I had the courage to leave someone that I was deeply in love with, because it was very unhealthy, again, was that random resilience that I think we all possess, but we just have to tap into. So once I went to Michigan, I was definitely not in a good place mentally, emotionally, because of, again, all the unresolved trauma. Notice nothing really got resolved. The eating disorder, the drinking, the brain injury of my brother, et cetera. It's kind of like a Band-Aid was put on it. I wasn't on medication that I should have been on. I did not have the proper diagnosis. I was just going to a therapist. And back to our conversation about how you really need culturally competent mental health professionals because they can provide more harm than good. And I didn't realize that that was the case for me because of some of the comments that I was told, the advice, even the medical, medication insistence of 3 therapists that I didn't know they were not qualified to give. They're not psychiatrists, things like that. And so, it felt like I was starting completely over in the sense of literally I'm living in a state I've never lived in, never wanted to live in the middle of winter, it's winter.
What compelled you to move to Michigan?
Okay, so Ivan, he was going to U of M before the injury. So he was he did 2 years, then he had the injury. And then years later, by the grace of God, he's made miraculous. I mean, that's a whole journey, that's a whole story. But he went to community college in Pennsylvania, and then he's like, I think I'm ready to go back to school. And so he, applied to go back to U of M and finish his degree. They accepted him. And so that's where my parents and my brother were at Ann Arbor for U of M. And so I was like, well, I'm gone. Because there was more things going on. So basically I felt like there was no one in LA that I felt I could lean on. I actually needed my parents and I needed my family, which is my parents and my brother. And so I left, and I literally just had to start from zero emotionally because I was so drained, so everything from that relationship and from everything that just happened. And so I invested a lot into my healing. I did different models of therapy. I went deep into, reliving certain traumatic experiences. And, I'll share one thing. So prolonged exposure therapy, that's something I'd never done. And so for example,
I don't know what that is.
Okay, so usually it's for OCD, which I have been diagnosed with OCD, which honestly feels like another addiction because it's very compulsive. And so one of the traumas that I worked on through PET was my brother's brain injury. So certain things would trigger me. I didn't even know what this whole time PTSD is all over I'm radiating PTSD, and I didn't know that. I didn't even receive, there's so many opportunities that I could have received certain diagnoses and the proper treatment. And I didn't get it. So I didn't get my borderline, my PTSD, my OCD all until after law school, where it was you still are, there's a lot going on there. And so with PET, one of the traumas was my brother's injury. So at that point, it was still very hard for me to look at certain things, hear certain things. I couldn't do that. And that was the case for many different things. Maybe I couldn't be around men in certain situations, particular men. I could not see blood. There's so many things I would just I can't, you cry, you get so scared, or you have nightmares. I still have nightmares. And so, she helped me with, it's a whole thing. You have to relive the trauma. It's recorded. So you tell her, it's a 90-minute session every week, what happened, the most traumatic part. And then she gives you she helps you process it. And then you have homework for the rest of the week. So every day you got to listen to it. Not every day. I think whatever the amount was, I have to listen to the whole thing again. And then I also have to watch certain videos of people with brain injuries, people in comas, people on life support, people that are severely disabled from injuries, things like that. And
it sounds extremely intense.
It is intense, yeah. And I did that with a rape as well. And so it's a lot. And that's why when I say I put in a lot of work, it's because I really have put in a lot of work. And I knew that it would take this much work to create the life that I wanted. I wanted to feel peace, safety. And I could write a book on this because it's like I had a lot of relationships in my family that I needed to repair. And
Hmm.
so I've had very intense, very candid conversations with family members. I have confronted people that have abused me and said, "You did this to me." And surprisingly, they've apologized. Well, some of them weren't surprising, but some were. One I wasn't really sincere, so I'm not really going to count that, but he did literally say the words. And so
I was going to ask, I mean, I apologize if I'm out of line in asking this, but are those the types of apologies that you can accept?
yeah, so for me, growing up, I was raised Catholic. I no longer identify as Catholic, but I do believe in forgiveness and redemption and rehabilitation because of
Hmm.
me. Like I
Yeah.
have rehabilitated and I've seen, my friends like you, other people in recovery, it's possible to turn your life around. However, there's a caveat. There's a big asterisk. You have to show through your actions, your consistency, that you want this change, that you truly want to heal, one, and two, remorse. Is there
Mm.
actual remorse? Because I can forgive all day. That's different from reconnection. So I have forgive people that I have blocked and I have zero plans to ever speak to again. And then there's people that I have forgiven and they're in my life because they have
Hmm.
shown genuine remorse. They have done a lot of work just like I have, and things. And then, like, each case is specific. So some people there's reconnection, but there's still boundaries. Someone, there's like that's my heart, that's my family. Like, you're forgiven 100%. That's one person though. That's because that's I don't recommend that for people. I don't recommend that you reconnect with just everybody because once people show you who they are, you need to believe them the first time.
Hmm.
But I guess if I were to provide more context, it would make more sense. But for now, like, yeah, there's some people that I have forgiven. Um, the person that I did not believe the apology was sincere, that person will never have access to me again. And then one of them that I was surprised was actually my grandmother, who doesn't speak English. So I actually wrote her a letter in Spanish and I was surprised that she apologized. I was like, thank you. And that was it. But
Yeah.
it's like, I got backlash for that because it's like, oh my gosh, Priscilla, like, why do you have grudges against her? Why do you hate her? Why are you still living in the past? Da, 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 da. And it's like, why does me acknowledging what little Priscilla went through, why are you not allowing her the opportunity to speak her piece and to seek forgiveness or to
Mm.
seek that apology that she needs? Would you prefer that I just be angry and not have a relationship? Because when I set boundaries with someone, that's me still inviting them into my life. Like, I'm trying to have you in my life. Let's make this work. If I didn't want you in my life, you wouldn't be in my life. There would be no room for apologies or discussions. So that's another like cultural thing, that you do not
Hmm.
disrespect your elders. But what is disrespect? Basically, anything that isn't blind allegiance or,
Yeah.
acceptance. And so I've shown myself that I am very courageous in different ways because it took a lot of courage to speak up for little Priscilla, to speak up, to disclose trauma, to do so many different things that I've done. That's why I'm like, I don't, I don't wish this on anyone. I'm not necessarily happy at all that any of these things happen, but I can see that I've grown from them. I've chosen to grow from them. And
Hmm.
if I can survive certain things, and I'm like, okay, my threshold is here at this point, and so many things, it's just, I don't, yeah, like
Yeah.
any drama.
No, I was talking with someone the other day about, the the path of moving through hard things, and once you've kind of gotten to a point where you know that that's a muscle that you have access to, it's really powerful. And so I'll say that, and then I'll say this, Priscilla, you're an extremely strong woman,
Oh, thank you.
and I know that I'm probably not the first person to say that to you, but I mean, just an incredibly impressive, journey that you have been on. and even though, it sounds like there was a series of prolonged time where you were never in a position to really come up for air, you found a way to get to the air. You know what I mean? And I'm just in awe of the things that you've opened yourself up to in order to live the life that you ultimately are living today, right? And I want to also talk about your coaching, and I want to talk about how do you now, from the outside looking at someone else's trauma, help them through cycle breakers to kind of move into, I don't want to use this cliche term, but like live their best lives. And I've been thinking a lot about trauma, about PTSD, about generational trauma, and also about one's own individual traumas, right? Of which it sounds like, unfortunately for people of color, have both of those oftentimes that are, kind of coexisting. How do you in your practice, as a certified, trauma recovery coach, help people work through these things that, especially for folks of certain cultures and, of certain lineages, it's just really hard to just come to a certain degree of truth on and voice these things to themselves even. I mean, I have a hard time just like talking my truth to myself, let alone, getting into it so deeply that, that it's, you're now having conversations and trying to heal relationships with other people who have wronged you. So I just want to park that there, throw it back to you. How do you help people, get to a place where they can find the same strength that you've found in your own life?
I think it starts with, and while you were talking, I was like, oh, I have all these books, but I'll share them later. Because definitely literature education, learning about it, because I didn't learn any of this in school, in high school, college, anything. I had to learn about, like, what is generational trauma? I didn't even know what that term was until fairly recently, in like the last few years. But basically, my motivation is being that voice that I needed as a kid and as an adolescent to my clients, because it's remarkable how some people just, and I can relate, that they just want to be heard. They just want to have that space where they can be validated. And the thing with coaching is, it's actually not my role to validate you or your experience and say, yeah, that was really hard, or you're really strong. It's actually for me to help my client practice and strengthen their ability to self-validate, where they can say, I am courageous, I am creative, I can do this. And my role in helping them develop that is by having very powerful conversations where I ask, thought-provoking questions like, okay, so what's underneath you not pursuing your dream of acting? What's underneath that? And then it's like, oh, that's the tip of the iceberg. Then you see, well, growing up, I was always put down. I was always told that I wouldn't amount to anything. And then you just start to kind of chip away what's blocking them and what's having them buy into these limiting beliefs. Why? Because when you see procrastination, that is another symptom. It's not because they're lazy or because they don't care. Oftentimes it's perfectionism, or it's lack of ability to manage their moods. Like, it's a deeper issue beneath that. So my role is to just provide a safe, compassionate container where they can explore that, where they can just bring whatever they want to the table. And I'm just here to receive it. I'm not here to judge you, of course. I'm not here to validate or to tell you what you need to do. I'm here to kind of be like a mirror or like a soundboard for you to resolve your own battles and to achieve whatever goals you set. So that's essentially what I do. And then being trauma informed, I recognize and I can help them see, like where basically the whole fabric, because none of us exists in a vacuum. We're not just these isolated creatures. We all exist in society, in our family, in our schools, and whatever social setting. And especially with family, nobody is born into this world empty-handed. We all have an inheritance. So that inheritance consists of gifts like resilience, creativity, but also those traumas, in my case, warfare, poverty, domestic violence, substance abuse. And I didn't know that I was carrying all these things. I didn't know I had inherited them and that they kept showing up in my life. But once I was aware of them and realized that I have the agency to stop repeating these cycles, now I can start doing the work. Now I can start designing my own life. So now my life today is pretty mundane in the sense that what did I do today? I went to the dollar store. I went to the grocery store.
Not that exciting anymore.
No, it's not. That's like I really just
That's okay.
yeah, because and then when I'm like, wow, like when did I become a homebody? When like what happened? And I realized, oh wow, this is peaceful. This is actually the life that I wanted. It just I guess I didn't know it would look like this, but I'm choosing this life. I've curated this life. And if I can do it, then let me help other people because especially in Black and Brown communities, I mean, self-care is not exactly a thing. I think now millennials and like social media is normalizing it, but growing up, it's oftentimes for many of us, it's survival and it's having food, it's having shelter. It's not, okay, go take a bubble bath or, go do your nails. But I want to be part of that wave of change where it's like, okay, we don't have to keep atoning for other people's mistakes or carrying the emotional burdens of other people's traumas. It's okay to be healthy, to be happy. And that's a skill in itself because that's not something that you do overnight. You have to learn how to set boundaries and things like that.
Yeah, boundaries, those things are difficult. I have my own work to do around setting boundaries. I did, was thinking about kind of, in my own work and, what I've tried to do with my therapist at one point is I quite literally was trying to address, some of, I guess you could call it generational trauma. And I had to write out something to myself that I keep in a box, because sometimes I just don't want to deal with it even to this day. Mm-hmm. But just saying to myself, I no longer want to be the victim of somebody else's trauma. You know what I mean? And just kind of like putting it out there and just drawing the line in the sand. Now, granted, it's not always perfect, but that's my intention at least, right? Because I recognize that there are a lot of things that have happened in my life due to what has happened in previous generations' lives that had had never gotten resolved. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And ultimately, it was passed on. And I think that in a lot of ways, I mean, your name of your practice speaks for itself in like breaking those cycles. And they're such hard cycles to break within yourself, number one, but not to mention if they've been in existence for generations, so many generations that you can't even see as far back as they've been in existence. So I think that the work that you're doing is incredibly important. And I think that anybody sounds like has an opportunity to work with you is in a good space to be able to embark on that journey of breaking some of those cycles for themselves.
Thank you for saying that. I appreciate it.
No, absolutely. I'm going to ask you a few questions here to wrap this up.
Okay.
And I always preface this by saying one is a little bit of a hardball question, and the other one is, probably a lot easier. So, the last one will be a little more gentle. First question is, in kind of that span of time between, while you're at college and, the first two programs that you're in, or maybe before the programs, but just starting to get into the binge drinking and trying to get in and kind of taking these very unhealthy mechanisms into your existence. How would have someone who was around you, who would have maybe been a part of your support network, knew that you needed some help? Because I know that you said that, for example, your parents were like, well, you should probably join your brother in this wilderness, camp mm-hmm. or whatever we call it, recovery space. Mm-hmm. But how would someone have known that you, in fact, needed some help versus, kind of grasping at straws?
Yeah, actually, I credit my parents for all of my rehabs because they were the ones who noticed it. They, especially like with my eating disorder. I mean, I was around other people. No one said anything. They were the only ones that said something. And so with the drinking, I think of other, friends that I've noticed. To me, the biggest thing is consequences. I know sometimes people really fixate on frequency, like, oh, well, I don't drink every day. I just drink every other weekend or every month, okay. But when you do drink every other weekend or once a month, what happens? oh, I got a DUI last month, or oh, I had blackout sexual relations with someone I had no idea who they were, wasn't safe. Oh, I got into a fight with someone that I didn't even know. Things like that, where it's like, okay, so let's explore that. You did all these things, and yet you have plans tomorrow to go drink and do the same thing. What's going on? Why are you? That wasn't enough to be like, whoa, but why am I
Mm-hmm.
doing this? Because often people will look at, like Intervention, the program on A&E, where
Mm-hmm.
it's like extreme cases, and then you're like, wow, I thought rock bottom was them like 5 years ago when they were in jail or they were this, and you will be surprised maybe if like what some people will let go and not say is their bottom. So you kind of have to, don't compare yourself to anyone. Don't compare yourself to celebrities you've seen or to friends or to classmates. You have to just look at yourself and be like, okay, 2 years ago, I would have never done this, but now I'm doing this when I'm drunk. Or
Mm-hmm.
after I drank last time, I felt horrible. I told myself I would never do it again, but now I'm doing it again. So you really just have to look at the consequences of your drinking as it relates to how you feel, your safety, your decision making, and of course, education, employment, how that's affecting your relationships. So I believe that there were flags waving that someone, especially people that were, but that's the thing. I definitely isolated myself because I
Mm-hmm.
didn't want people to know that I was drinking. That wasn't something that I broadcasted. So there wasn't too many people close to me that would see that.
Yeah.
But yes, there were some people that could see it. And I also take ownership because if I probably wouldn't have wanted to speak to me if I would have seen me be belligerent or not friendly. And
Mm-hmm.
so I don't put it on anyone but me. um, so yes, if in short, if you see someone that is compromising their value system, their future, their well-being, whatever that looks like, then just ask them.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes people are going to be defensive, or they may even lack the awareness and think that you're doing too much or you're judging them. But you can just ask a simple question like, hey, how are you feeling? What's going on? I noticed, last weekend was a little wild, or however you want to say it. Is there something that is going on? You don't usually act like this, just kind of like at least open the door. And however much they want to come inside, that's up to them. But you did your part because you
Yeah.
can't force anyone.
Totally. And you never know when they're ready to have that conversation. You know what I mean? Like where they're at. I appreciate that. Last question, for someone who is sitting there listening to this or had listened to this or knows, and they're sitting there thinking to themselves, like, I think I might have an issue that I need to address, but I don't even necessarily know the first step to take. What would you suggest?
I would suggest speaking to someone who is educated on the topic. So, because not all therapists are even educated on sobriety or addiction, not even doctors. Like, I've met people that they think it's like a character flaw. Find, maybe do research online for support groups. For example, if you're a Black woman or non binary or trans, there's the Sober Black Girls Club, which I'm a
Mm-hmm.
part of on Tuesdays. It's open to BIPOC, to queer BIPOC. And you find spaces like that where it's not clinical and it's people that look like you and people that can understand your experiences. And it's a space to explore,
Mm.
like, what is my relationship? So you can just step into there and start asking questions. You don't have to have the answers or have to label yourself. It's just let me be curious. Just start with gentle curiosity and start seeking answers, but just be very selective with who you get advice from, because you don't necessarily want to ask maybe someone in your family who doesn't have any background in this. I mean, you don't, because they're not equipped or trained to give you the right information. If you broke your wrist You're going to go to a doctor. You're not going to go to your neighbor who is an artist and ask them, like, what do you think?
Mm-hmm.
That's not wise. So treat your mental health the same as your physical health, and have standards with who you seek advice from, and also just be compassionate with yourself. It's hard. Like I even struggle throughout this interview with my nervous laughing and my discomfort, because it's hard to look, even so many years removed, to look back and be like, why was I doing that? But now I have more compassion, and I'm like, okay, 18-year-old Priscilla, 19-year-old Priscilla, she's always been a good person. She just was hurting a lot and didn't know how to cope with that trauma. It all comes down to trauma. So, have compassion for yourself and be open to the possibility that you have unresolved trauma.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I want folks to be able to find you, Priscilla. So where can we get more of Priscilla, her knowledge, her services if necessary?
Sure. At Cycle Breaker Coach on Instagram. And my website is priscillamaria.com. And I have LinkedIn, but I mean, those are the best ones. Okay. Instagram or my website. Oh, cool. And then the books. Can I share the books?
Yeah, please do.
One's missing because it was in my kitchen, but I Didn't Start With You by Mark Allen. And this is all about how generational trauma is passed down, like the science of it, different examples. My Grandmother's Hands by Resmaa Menakem. You've heard of it?
Yes, I've been meaning to read that. I've had a few folks recommend it to me. I think I'm definitely going to pick it up. So that focuses on racialized trauma, and then The Body Keeps the Score is very well known for, I have read that. It's good. I definitely was reading it like, wow, why did my therapist read this? Because they could have been more helpful if they would have applied. And then the one that I don't have is The Pain We Carry by Maria Guitérrez, and it's about generational trauma for BIPOC. Awesome. Priscilla, thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it. I think that you're helping a lot of people, and I appreciate that you're bringing your energy to this space to help Stacking Days potentially, give someone some assistance. So thanks for your time. Appreciate it. It's an honor. Thank you for having me. Thank you for listening to the Stacking Days podcast. If you'd like to get in touch with the show, email me at rdg@stackingdays.com or follow us on Instagram at stackingdays. If you like the podcast, please rate, review, subscribe, and by all means share it with a friend who you think needs to be invited into the conversation. Until we meet again, be well, one day at a time.